As America votes to pick its new president, the Indian Express brings you 360-degree coverage of a world-changing election. With Sree Sreenivasan in New York, Simon Marks in Washington, D.C., Arthur Sullivan in Berlin, Mary C. Curtis in North Carolina. With Indian Express experts Pratap Bhanu Mehta, C. Raja Mohan, Bhaskar Chakravarti, Tanvi Madan and Shubhajit Roy. 4th November onwards, US Presidential Election 2024 only on the Indian Express YouTube channel. Brought to you by Striker Hexo.ai.
Donald Trump would walk into that office with an enemies list. On day one, when I am elected, I will walk in with a to-do list.
Donald Trump.
Everyone who simply wants to do one thing, make America great again.
US Election 2024 brought to you by Striker Hexo.ai.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to US Election 2024 on the Indian Express. I'm Sree Sreenivasan in New York, and we have a fantastic show for you. This is the moment of truth, as the Atlantic magazine put it, and we have so much to talk about. Breaking news happening all over the place as we try to help you understand the facts and understand the analysis that will help you be able to figure out what is happening in the United States and who's going to be leading the United States for the next 4 years. We have a historic election with Kamala Harris versus Donald Trump. It's now just past 11 p.m. Eastern time in New York, which means that many of the polls have closed. Most of the polls have closed, but most of the results are too close to call. What that means is that in the swing states, the battleground states that you've been hearing about, such as North Carolina and Wisconsin and Michigan and Pennsylvania, the election is too close to call, too early to call, so we don't know who has won the election. In the course of the next hour, we will try to find out if we have a clear picture. At the moment, with the way the Electoral College is set up in the US, we see that Donald Trump is leading, but that means this is still early and we do not know who will win for sure. I have two fantastic folks who are going to help me understand and help you learn about the US election, and I'm going to tell you about them right now. We are joined by Mary C. Curtis, who is a commentator and an expert on politics. And we're also joined by Lee Miringoff of the Marist Poll. The Marist Poll is one of the most important polls in America, and both of them are going to help us break down the election, understand who's leading, what went right for each campaign, and what went wrong. We will also be looking at the results as they come in from the various networks here. So stay tuned right here on the Indian Express. This is brought to you by Striker and Hexo.ai. With that, let me welcome Mary and Lee.
A busy and long night. I'm glad to be here, and I'm very interested in what Lee has to tell us and what insights he can offer.
Well, it is an interesting night, and as expected, we knew there was going to be a lot to talk about. So, Mary, nice to see you, and Sree, nice to see you again.
Thank you for being here. Lee is at the headquarters of the Marist Poll in Poughkeepsie, New York. Mary is in North Carolina, one of those swing states. Tell me, please, Mary, what you're thinking at this moment at 11 p.m. Eastern. We'll just take a look at what's happening on the TV screens right now. We are seeing the expected states have been called, meaning the states that were already Democratic have been called. So there have been no surprises. The Republican states have been called mostly. So there haven't been surprises. What are you thinking right now, Mary?
Well, I'm thinking that, as you said, things are tight in the battleground states that Harris has to win, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. But things are trending toward spending his way toward Trump's way. Sorry, it's been a long day. And I'm just at this point thinking of the why. Both of them closed their campaigns on very different messages. One a little dark and backward looking, make America great again, to go back to something, I don't know, an imagined time of America of stability and peace and equality, which I think wasn't great for everyone. And Kamala Harris looking forward to her vision. Unfortunately, I do think that she was tied to the President Biden, in ways it's very difficult to separate from. And she ran a great campaign. She only had a little over 100 days to do it. And it was that as well, the chaos of how the Democrats had a candidate and changed to another candidate. And she had to make herself known and get established in different ways. So there'll be a lot of postmortems, but right now we actually don't know what the result is.
Thank you, Mary. Let's go to Lee, Dr. Lee Miringoff from the Marist Poll. Thank you so much for your thoughts.
Yeah, my pleasure. I mean, I agree with what Mary just indicated, that I think part of the problem, and it's hard to do a postmortem when the election is still going on, but let's assume that Donald Trump does win a couple of the remaining states, enough to get him to the 270 electoral votes needed to win. So what does that now sound like? It sounds like Vice President Harris was unable to separate herself enough from Joe Biden, whose approval rating is today, among people who voted, in the low 40s. I think I saw it was 41%. So in a sense, you had to think of Joe Biden that you did not like him. And I know Harris was talking about turning the page, but there was no clear sense of how she was going to differ herself or separate herself from Joe Biden and the policies, and she didn't want to appear to be disloyal. So it was a little bit of a catch-22, and I think in the end, she may not have been able to navigate that.
Tell us a little bit about how you were looking at the polls, and what did the Marist poll tell us?
Well, I mean, I think we knew all along it was going to be very close. It had been a campaign with a whole series of cataclysmic events, none of which seemed to move big numbers of voters. And I think we had, between one candidate with 34 felony convictions and a couple assassination attempts, and the Democratic candidate, originally the President Biden, dropping out. There's just a whole lot of things that were going on. And yet it all stayed within 5 points the whole time. And a lot of the states didn't move at all. So we see an electorate that was largely baked in. And we're talking about a group of voters who are pretty dissatisfied. The perception that the economy was in bad shape, I'm not sure that matched all the facts, but that's what people thought. And they were blaming that on Joe Biden, and by guilt by association then with Kamala Harris. So we're seeing the need for Harris to win the electoral votes in the so-called blue wall of Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Michigan, as Mary indicated. Short of that, it's going to be very hard for her to survive the evening.
So let me explain what we were talking about. You heard the word battleground, and you also hear the word swing state. So you can see the states that are leading red or leaning blue, but you see the beige colored states that are up for grabs. Now there are 5 left. If North Carolina and Georgia have gone to Donald Trump, then that means to get to 270, it's going to be very important for Kamala Harris to get Pennsylvania on the right. And then in the middle, you see Michigan and Wisconsin. And if he gets those 3, then she has a very good shot. But it'll all depend on what happens, because you need 270 electoral votes to become president of the United States. It's not about popularity. It's not about the popular vote, but it'll depend. So look what happens. If I put Pennsylvania in his corner, look up on the right, you see 258 to Republicans. But if that changes blue, then she's at 257. Then all she needs is to get Michigan, and she's at 272. If she doesn't get Michigan, then she can get Wisconsin, and that puts her very close. And then she would need Nevada or Arizona. So we still have a long way to go. She's leading in some of those states, but we still have time to figure out where things are, and we'll be seeing that. What makes the show different from others, folks, is that you will be able to see real conversation and to help you understand. This is part of the 360 coverage of Indian Express of the US election on the website, on all the social media channels, brought to you by Stryker and Hexo.ai. We also bring in your comments. So here's Tara watching on Facebook, and here's Kya watching on LinkedIn, and Gudu is watching on YouTube. Good morning from Pakistan. Tell us where you're watching from. Tell us what you're up to. Tell us how you're feeling about this election, and ask the experts. Mary in North Carolina, and we have Lee from the Marist Poll. Jonathan's watching from New York. I want to know if you can tell us, Lee, what were some things that have surprised you so far?
Well, I think one of the things was there's an expectation that Kamala Harris was going to, take a big bite out of the Republican column. That there was a lot of dissatisfaction with even during the primaries when Haley was, getting 20% of the vote, even when she no longer was a candidate in the Republican primaries. And there was a sense that there were a lot of people who had been associated with Donald Trump might bolt and vote for Harris. And we saw that there were more Republicans who voted for Harris than Democrats who voted for Trump, but it wasn't enough. Or doesn't appear to be enough, certainly in the states that have been called so far. And then I think also there was a sense that the Latino vote was going to reverse itself from a sense that they were looking favorably towards Trump. And then there was a whole dust up at the Madison Square Garden with the island garbage joke, hardly a joke. But then there was a sense that maybe, in fact, she would do better with the Latino community in Florida, in Texas, and in other states. And that doesn't seem to have materialized either. So I think there was a couple surprises. She had a lot of things in her favor, Harris has and did, but it just comes up a hair short.
So we will know in the next hour or so where we are as the show ends. We will know more, but we are right now watching U.S. Elections 2024 on the Indian Express, brought to you by Stryker and Hexo.ai. Mary, as we are waiting, what are some things that have surprised you?
Well, one thing that doesn't surprise me, Donald Trump said in his first campaign and his first term that he could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and not lose any voters. And I think he was pretty much right. He has that ceiling. It was like a floor and a ceiling. And he has people that will never leave him. And that is just the truth. And as I said before, a commentator said she has to be flawless and he can be lawless. We saw him sway on the stage. We saw him descend at the end into very negative attacks, calling Americans the enemy within, using very violent rhetoric and very insulting, personally insulting rhetoric against his opponent. I mean, J.D. Vance, his running mate, called her trash. And none of this seemed to matter. Particularly white evangelicals stayed with him. They feel he talked about being spared during the assassination attempts, and it was a sort of God chose him, and they really repeated that sentiment. He had Franklin Graham standing next to him on the stage, and the whole nostalgia for a country where white Christianity is ascendant, it had an appeal. And yes, as Lee was saying, there were these other issues. We had a gender gap, and yes, women went overwhelmingly for Harris, but it's interesting that he went for that white male, younger male vote, and they did seem to turn out. That he made the last appearance on the Joe Rogan, very popular podcast. They did seem to turn out, and he didn't have specifics, but he did seem to have some sort of a vision, even though it was a dark one, and they didn't ask for the specifics from him. Now, many of them might be surprised if he starts to actually initiate and put into place some of the things in his own project and Project 2025, this time with people who won't stop him. But I guess enough of them were willing to take the chance. They didn't seem that disturbed, it seems, many of his voters, that he appointed the 3 judges that overturned Roe, and they liked what he said on the economy and on the border.
Thank you. We say good morning from India, good coverage of the election. What is the majority vote count? So what I'm going to do is to ask our producers to show the needle that shows us where we are with the majority, the popular vote, as well as what's happening on the electoral vote, the Electoral College. And meanwhile, as we're prepping that, Lee, tell me, as you were polling this year, what are the things that stood out to you?
Well, it was, look, we know that the American electorate is very polarized. That's been going on for several decades already. We have very intense campaigns and very close results in those races. And what we saw was there are 2 very different worldviews. On the one hand, Democrats were very concerned about the future of democracy, concerned about healthcare, concerned about women's reproductive rights, and that whole issue that has become such a mobilizing force for the Democrats. The Donald Trump people were still very much lockstep on the economy and also on the issue of immigration and all the things that he said about that. But recognize that we've been polarized, we stay polarized. It's a 50-50 nation, plus or minus a few votes. And people felt that that Donald Trump was going to shake things up more, that he was an agent of change just by virtue of his personality and the kind of cultural following that he has been able to engender. And as we both have commented, although Kamala Harris tried to talk about turning the page, there was no evidence as to how that was going to occur. And as a result, she was Joe Biden's vice president. And as Mary said in the beginning, it was a 100-day campaign. I think it was an excellently run campaign. I think she was a much better candidate than everybody gave her credit for initially, and certainly when she was vice president. But as the numbers you're showing here in the graph, it looks as the evening progresses that the expectations on the so-called needle, that he is going to get more electoral votes and win the popular vote as well, unless she's able to do an unusually higher turnout in places like California, whose votes obviously are just being counted, started right now.
Surosh is saying, although Kamala's trailing right now, can she still win? And if so, how? So I'm going to show on the screen our map that looks at the way to understand the election is to look at the 270 number. That's the number that everyone should be paying attention to. And we are going to look at that on the screen right now, bring that to you. And what you see here is that she would have to win Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania. If she wins those, then she will be able to still win the election to be president of the United States. Remember, it's not the popular vote that matters, because if it was a popular vote, there would have been a president, Al Gore, and a president, Hillary Clinton. That is not how the American system is. So these swing states or battleground states are going to play an important role. Lee, I want to ask you, as you look at this map, what are things that when people from other countries look at this, say, this system is so bad, why is it like this? Why will it never change?
Well, it's very hard to change it because there's people in small states who think they have a say in matters, and they might have some electoral votes. And interestingly, those folks count more per person. So a person in Wyoming, which has only 3 electoral votes, because you're guaranteed a minimum of 3, even if your population is very small, that actually represents people fewer than you might find in a place like California, for example, where one electoral vote counts for obviously tons and tons of people. So there's an imbalance structurally, and that's why a Democrat can win the popular vote but lose the Electoral College. Not sure that's going to happen tonight, but it could still, depending on the final count. And I must say that there's still numbers to be counted, and even in the states that have been declared a winner for Trump or Harris from the East Coast aren't necessarily complete in terms of the total count. So I think that remains to be seen. I would comment though that when you're looking, because I've played with that map many times in the last couple of months, Idaho in the upper left-hand corner, you do have as blue and it is red, and that's slow. I think it's 4 electoral votes. If you switch that, it makes the numbers just a little bit different. But in a close election, that would mean a lot. But just to point that out, I think.
Good catch there. That's Lee Miringoff able to, he knows the polls so well. And so we have, of course,
there you go.
we have switched that. It's going to be very tight, as it has been all evening. And depending on how it goes, folks, you can talk to us right now. Post your comments. Tell us where you're watching from. Tell us your questions. Ask us your questions, because we have experts here. I'll just read a comment here from Henlo, who says, we got 2 bad picks, but I think Trump will cut war funding, so I prefer him. That's one of the things, Mary, that we've heard from a lot of people, that the world wasn't on fire when he was president, but because there was no war in the Ukraine and no war in Palestine, in Gaza, and in Israel right now, in Lebanon, all of that's happening right now. But the world was in fire in different ways. Every day there was news about how he was dealing up with news on the international stage. And it was also when we saw the way he handled the pandemic. So Mary, what is your estimation of how he has got this reputation, even though 4 years ago in this country, a country with 5% of the world's population had 20% of the world's COVID deaths? He kept saying to people, were you better off 4 years ago than you are now? Please give us your thoughts.
I know. Well, we do forget some of those things. Once, I think that Trump is really unique, because we've seen when other candidates try to act like Trump, like a Ron DeSantis, it doesn't work for them. People, and part of it is because he is a celebrity. He was a celebrity. He was made on The Apprentice, which was people admit he's not a very good businessman, but it was the image of it was a television show, and we like our entertainment. I thought maybe perhaps people had gotten exhausted and the ratings were going down, but perhaps not. But yeah, and I don't think that Putin would have not invaded Ukraine. And I think when people talk about war funding, we are doing that funding. We are not fighting there, but they are. And there are hot spots all over the world, Yemen and other places, that were going to war and in war, and people were dying. And we really don't take that in consideration as much, because Americans really don't pay a lot of attention often to foreign policy in that way. As I was saying earlier, when I was speaking to representatives from the EU countries, they are bordering, many of them, Russia. So their fears are very real in ways our fears are not. And when you talk about Gaza, well, Netanyahu really does want Trump to get in, because he has felt that he would give him a freer rein, because Trump has said, let him finish the job. And he has been approving of settlements, which are against international law. So I think we have seen globally, though, many countries go toward, when people are dissatisfied, and a stronger hand is very attractive, because they will come in and fix things. And he has actually said that. He catches that mood of the zeitgeist. I can fix these things. So I think that's really interesting. And I think it's thrown out, Lee, a lot of conventional wisdom, because we've heard that debates matter. Well, they mattered to Joe Biden. It pretty much pushed him out of the race. And then Trump had a terrible debate in which Kamala Harris was clearly in control, and he was lost. He threw out falsehoods about Haitians eating pets. And when asked about healthcare, he said he had concepts of a plan. But people still went to him, and we didn't hear about age, where we heard about age all the time with Joe Biden, and they're almost the same age, and he still would be the oldest president. So it's kind of fascinating. I do think a lot of blame will come to Biden, in a sense. There will be people who say, you know what, if you had just chosen not to run and there was a primary, perhaps that would have made a difference. I don't think as much will come. Yes, people will say, if she loses Pennsylvania, should she have picked Josh Shapiro as VP or whatever? But I just don't think. I think more of it will come to Biden. But all of it, like I said, is Trump is just a unique individual. Teflon doesn't even start to describe him. He has an appeal, and a lot of Americans like what he's selling.
No, as they say, he tells it like it is, and that seems to be enough for a lot of people.
And when you're in your polling, what is it that people forget about him, about what we know about the chaos of those years, that thinking about the prices of food that they're convinced is so bad, or that the border is in trouble, or that people are going to come and invade and attack them, all of this stuff. The economy, as you know, Lee, has been actually doing very well. It's had the best recovery of any of the major developed countries. The Economist, of all publications, a fiscally conservative publication, said that if we had a vote, we would vote for Kamala Harris. So please explain to our international audience watching on the Indian Express, sponsored by Stryker and Hexo.ai, explain what this is, please.
And it's not easy to explain. And I think Mary talked about this kind of unique figure that Donald Trump has been on the American political scene. And by traditional standards and modes of evaluation, look, 34 felony convictions would, under normal circumstances, for any other candidate, would have been a knockout punch. And for him, it's just one step in a long series of things that that traditionally would not have been acceptable to a population, but that he was immune from those standards. Look, Hillary Clinton was very successful in the debates and told us exactly what was likely to transpire with his relationship with Putin, for example. And, you know, that didn't seem to, although she won the popular vote, the shock was that she didn't ultimately win. And I think today there was a little bit of an expectation along those lines that Harris was closing well and that Trump wasn't. And again, that by traditional standards, I mean, Trump was saying a lot of things that you would not want a candidate saying in the last week. And the crowds for her were enormous, and enthusiasm was higher than for him, and his unfavorability rating was higher than hers. But yet he was able just to get that concentrated, focused support that has been with him and doesn't seem to move away from him, regardless of whatever seems to be going on, or whatever he says, or the inability to articulate some policies and the language and the like, which perhaps is not exactly what people want as their role model, but nonetheless is what our U.S. president does talk about.
Lee, talk about this. Why does talking abstract concepts of an idea work for Trump, but not for the Democrats? Why is it that people are willing to take a chance on the Republicans? We know that, as Bill Clinton famously showed us, a fact that 50 million jobs brought out and created by Democratic presidents versus 1 million by Republican presidents. Mm-hmm. Why does this stuff not penetrate?
Well, I think, let's talk about Joe Biden for a second. Now, his first year, people thought was a disaster. His approval rating went down, and yet he accomplished 2 of the 3 main goals, including the infrastructure bill, which then a lot of Congress people then went around who had voted against it, highlighting all the projects in their district as having done things that they had, in fact, not done or not supported. So I think Joe Biden, is not the salesman. He's, clearly he had lost a lot of energy in the last couple of years, and as was seen highlighted in the debate. But he just, was not convincing that he had turned things around. And the Democrats, generally, look, the deficits have been under the Republicans, the balanced budgets have been under the Democrats. That would come as a great shock to most people who think it's just the opposite. And I think Kamala Harris, to her credit, was a tough fighter. When she was attacked, she attacked back, which doesn't always, it's not always the way with Democratic approaches. But I think to her credit, she ran, I think, an excellent campaign against a person who seems to not be evaluated either in the media or by the public, or a significant part of the public, in a way that other people would be.
Lee, I know you'll have to leave soon, so I want to just ask you this question around race and gender. We know that Hillary Clinton had to fight the gender issue. Yeah. Kamala Harris has gender as well as race. And what that combination a country that is so advanced that has never voted for a woman president, never elected a woman president, though we've seen developing countries and developed countries around the world that have had female presidents and prime ministers, including in South Asia, in India, in Bangladesh, in Pakistan, Sri Lanka. So talk about that for us, please. And then I know you'll have to go back. It's a very busy night for you.
No, I appreciate that. But, we always think of, Americans think of themselves as number one. But in this category, clearly we're not. And I think think back when Hillary Clinton was running and people said, well, I'd like to have a woman president, just not this one. Well, now we had another chance and may not have come up with accepting Kamala Harris either. And I think that, there are people in the country who are not at that level ready to accept the diversity that she represented. It's hard to say, well, next time X, Y, and Z will happen. But for a lot of people in this country who were very touched by her during the campaign, this if she in fact loses, this will be a great disappointment for them.
Dan says, excellent perspective from Mary and Lee to understand what is happening and why. That's what we focus on this show, U.S. Election 2024 on the Indian Express, brought to you by Stryker and Hexo.ai. Thank you, everybody, for following Indian Express on all its channels and for watching on IndianExpress.com. Lee, a final thought before you go, and then I'll turn to Mary.
Final thought, I worked with a lot of students here at Marist College, and, there is hope in the next generation who is very much engaged and connected. So I thought, for types like me who've been around this track many times, it's nice to have a group of younger folks who still have that enthusiasm and are still yet to make their mark on things. So that's sort of where I am right now.
What would you say to a partner who's stress watching from Philadelphia?
Say that again. Stress watching
from Philly.
Oh, I don't know. It's we've had bad moments, and maybe the Democrats. Look, who knows what the House is going to be, the Senate. The issues will move on, and so will the country. Even if there is disappointment by a lot of people, close to half of the country who voted for her and may have come up short tonight.
Are you worried about violence? Either way, whatever happens with the elections?
Well, I can't imagine violence right now for the Donald Trump group if he wins, who, would have called this thing rigged and stolen and all that if he lost. I mean, they kind of sort of, spike the football now and then say, hey, this turned out okay, despite all his complaining about how the deck was stacked and this the deep state was not going to allow this to happen. Clearly,
so in the end, you're pointing out that America has the system. It is what the system is, but we should still make sure that there's that peaceful transfer of power, and that's a good thing for this country. Our guest has been. Please.
I was just going to say, and you would want both sides to join in that notion. I'm not sure what would have happened had Harris been victorious today.
Yeah, and we don't know. It could still happen. But at this moment, at 11:34 p.m. Eastern time, it is leaning towards Donald Trump. The New York Times Needle is saying it's very likely that it will be Donald Trump. Our guest has been Lee Miringoff of the Marist Poll, one of the most important polls and most important pollsters. Thank you so much for joining Indian Express and our coverage of U.S. election 2024. Thanks.
My pleasure.
And that was Lee. He was so great to have him with us. What a great perspective. I learned so much, and I know our audience did as well. I want everyone who's watching right now to tell us where you're watching from on Facebook, on YouTube, on Instagram, on Twitter, on LinkedIn. We're on the Indian Express website as well. This is a chance for you to have your questions be posed to our experts and for you to understand what is happening right now. The election is too close to call because of these what are called the swing states have not been called, meaning the election results haven't come in yet. When they do, we will then know who has won. Thank you so much, everyone, for watching us here. We're so glad to have you. We have so many questions coming in. Praveen says, projections seem to suggest Trump is coasting to a win. Is it so? At the moment, Perveen, it is what it looks like. But there are 3-4 major states that are in play. If Kamala Harris is able to win in those states, she will be the next president. But at the moment, it is not looking like it will be Kamala Harris. But we will be watching, and you should know that these results take time. And let me say hi to Kalpana and Shivani watching from Bangalore, India on LinkedIn. We're on all these channels, folks, and this is what makes us different. We're able to bring you in like this and have your comments, your questions on the air. So please do tell us what you're watching and what are your questions. What would be the impact of Trump and Harris on Europe and Eastern European countries? That's a great question, right, for Mary, who has been talking to people from Europe and has been sharing her views. Go ahead, please.
Well, they, of course, the American people elect the American president, so they will work and make their case to either Harris or Donald Trump, depending on who is the president. That said, they do worry about the U.S.'s commitment to NATO. And we see some countries that, Sweden joined, and some of that is the anxiety toward a expansionist Russia, Putin, who is made his wishes known that he wants to go back, make Russia, make the Soviet Union great again, and to expand to neighbors.
Or even the Russian Empire, the old Russian Empire.
Yeah,
he would love that too.
Yeah, so I think that would be the case. And Donald Trump, remember the last time when he was president, made a lot of enemies internationally. He demanded that European countries or the EU countries pay more of their, NATO countries rather, pay more of their share. Of course, there are some folks who really like Donald Trump, and we see some of the, like in the United Kingdom, the Farage folks who are more leaning right wing, the Brexit people found comfort and kinship with Donald Trump. And we see in Italy and other countries, the right wing, they really are being elected. Orban, it's a democracy, but he has certainly put his stamp on the laws, on the judgeships. He is very friendly with Donald Trump. I think he's been to Mar-a-Lago. In fact, I would have to check on that, but I do believe. So there would also, some of the people who are more of the strongmen type of leaders would welcome it. So I think you will have mixed reactions. And I think Americans, where many are saying we're sending money to Ukraine that could be spent here, I think part of that is the feeling that if we support them, they will fight Russia and other countries will not have to, and it will not be expansionist. We don't know what will happen. It's so much uncertainty. So that's not a definite answer, but they will work with a President Trump. A lot of them will be worried and some will find comfort. Netanyahu would certainly like it because I think then he certainly would proceed with vigor with his attacks.
And those are the people who, in the state of Michigan, Muslims and Arab Americans who were so upset by what happened in Gaza that they wanted to send a clear message to the White House, and therefore we're supporting third-party candidates or supporting Donald Trump. And so we're seeing that. Parna Mukherjee says the federal government decimation, regulatory impact, and NATO. These are the things that would affect Europe. And Sumit is watching from Pune and says, excited to see the result soon as swing states results unfold. So he's watching from Pune. Thank you. On LinkedIn, we have folks across the different countries and different platforms. Look at this, Facebook. Greetings from Bhutan, says Sunita. What impact, if any, on Russia if Trump wins? A lot of impact on Russia, on the world. You know, there was a moment earlier this summer where a commentator in Singapore posted a very powerful video. At that point, it was Biden versus Trump, and said, Mary, he said that whoever wins, we lose, meaning the rest of the world will lose because America will continue to impose its will and interfere and cause problems around the world. And therefore, it's something that will happen. It is true that whoever wins, America will continue to be America, but there is a difference between Trump and Harris in terms of how they see the world. And if we look at nothing else but the environment, we're going to see that Trump pulling out of major agreements that affect Asia, that affect the entire planet, is going to be a problem. He is friendly with and endorsed by and hand in hand with Elon Musk, who is supporting these measures, and people who are Republican candidates and soon to be elected in the House and in the Senate, who are going to deny, along with Trump, climate change. And we have experienced climate change in Asia, in India, in the subcontinent, and we're going to see that accelerate because of this election. And I don't think that was something that was made very clear to everyone, and that's what we're seeing. We saw our producer show on the screen news about a major senator who has lost the election, a Democratic senator from Ohio, which once used to be a swing state, has conceded the election to Bernie Moreno while speaking on stage in Columbus. So your reaction to that, Mary?
I think more and more, as I spoke to Amy Walter of the Cook Report, you don't see people splitting the ticket. So Sherrod Brown has been an excellent senator for Ohio. He's a child of Ohio, his rumpled suits. He was against NAFTA. He's pro-union. He has done a lot for the state, and that's how he ran, the senator from Ohio. But he was overtaken by the fact that it's a red state. So folks went in to vote for Trump and then just went down the line. And Trump, if he becomes president, will have a Republican Senate, it looks like, now that Sherrod Brown, it was only a slim margin. So they will have the control of the Senate. He will be able to appoint any judges. It will be interesting. Now, I'm sure Democrats are hoping at least the House would turn, so there would be one branch of government. If indeed, I'm assuming that Trump is going to win, that would be fighting against it. So, yeah. And what you said about climate, you have the governor of Florida, which has many, many storms, so much so that insurance companies have pulled out of the state denying climate change. So that is the view of one party. You're right. This is about the future planet, the whole globe. And the last question you asked, Lee, about the issue of race and gender. When I was young, my mother would say, you have to work twice as hard to get half as far, because a lot of your accomplishments won't be recognized or will be denigrated. And I think we saw a little of that in that she did run a great campaign. She did clean his clock in the debate, and she's educated and intelligent, and none of that mattered. And he was a candidate who called her that she was born mentally deficient, and called her stupid, dumb as a rock, laughed when people at his rally implied she was a prostitute. And this, for a Black and South Asian woman, of whatever you want to say about her, of great education and poise, this is what a lot of people, if you didn't agree with him, you were okay with that. It wasn't a deal breaker. And that says a lot to how far we have to go in this country on those matters.
Thank you. Let's go to some of these questions here. We both can answer this. Why are the results important to China and Russia? Russia, we know the answer, that Russia wants to have its way in the world, and one of the only places in the world that will stand up against it is the United States. And it wants to show that democracy isn't ideal. It shows that it is chaotic, it's problematic, and they are actively involved in sabotaging these elections. Bomb threats today that were called in have been traced to Russia. And we, of course, know the election interference in 2016. Donald Trump is Vladimir Putin's candidate, and that we have seen here. Also with China, we are going to see both candidates would have stood up to China, but we will know what the policies are going to be. These tariffs, Mary, if you can talk about that he keeps saying that I'll put tariffs on China, not understanding that it will affect everyday Americans. How so?
Oh, yeah. Well, it will raise the prices here. They will basically pass them on to American consumers, all of those things you buy from China. And we don't make a lot of those things. So where do people think they come from, and who's going to pay the tariff? So, yeah, I think that for him to say that, some people just think, well, it'll just mean they'll pay more. No, we'll pay more, but we'll see that. In the same way as if he pushes out all the undocumented people in this country, I think in Texas, half of the construction workers are undocumented. Try to get your roof put on, right? And for how much? The man who asked him a question in Florida, I believe it was, he said, "I chop broccoli and pick strawberries." Those are the people doing the work. So if he enacts some of the things he's promised, Americans will pay a price.
Here's a comment from Pallavi. African Americans have to work twice as hard to get half as far. She's going to use that. Thank you for that quote, Mary, says Pallavi. And it's something that we have heard about African Americans in this country for a long time. And one of the reasons, if you're watching in India and wondering why it is that people are willing to vote, as there's a question here about this, that moving toward more right-wing candidates around the world, including the United States, it's because in the US, there hasn't been a proper reckoning about slavery and what America has done to African Americans as well as to Native Americans. If you go to Europe, in countries like Germany, they acknowledge and own what they did to the Jewish people in the Holocaust. In the United States, we are running away from that background of history, what made America. And so we are constantly told how great America is, but not enough is said about what America was built on and what America has done all over the world. And that's one of the things that we're keeping an eye on. Folks, I'm just looking at on TV, we are still too close to call in most of the battleground states. North Carolina has been called. So if you look at the gray, we're going to zoom in a little bit. If you look at the gray areas, those are the ones that are still up. Some of them are battleground states, some are not. But you can see Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota will go for the Democrats for sure. If those three states go for Kamala Harris, she still has a chance. But otherwise, those votes are going to end up going to Donald Trump, and Donald Trump will be the next president of the US. One of the things that I think folks are confused about when they're watching all of this is why is it that these states have these divisions, Mary? And also, they're not as obviously. It doesn't mean everybody is Republican in a Republican state or Democratic in a Democratic state, right? Like, look at California. She's going to win in California, but he's going to get 1 million plus votes, maybe more. So explain that to us. I'm not going to hold you responsible for all American history here, but please give us your sense.
Yeah, and I wanted to just say, not only do we not reckon with it, now we're trying to get history books not to teach the truth, and also deny how those policies have the systemic racism have an effect on what is happening today. There's no sense of that. So they want to say that that doesn't exist. It's as if the slate is clean. But, the ignorance is great on that. As far as the states, yeah, it's kind of interesting because if you go into any one of these states, like you say, Donald Trump will get more votes in California than he'll get in some states that he won, of the smaller states. And I do think that there is in every state, if you go, you'll see these pockets of blue, which is more of the urban, the cities, areas, also university cities, the cities where universities are located and colleges. And then you have more rural areas, suburban areas, ex-urban areas. And so that is really the big divide. And you'll find that in pretty much you go to a deep red state like Louisiana, but Baton Rouge, where a university is, it's very different. And so that's been sort of the disadvantage for Democrats, because a lot of their votes are great numbers, but they're concentrated in different areas. So you get all of that vote there instead of being more spread out. I think I've heard the best way that you're going to make some of these states more blue is for people to move, which you can't ask them to do.
Yeah, that's going to be hard. This American project is a work in progress, as we know. At the moment, Donald Trump is leading in Michigan and leading in Pennsylvania. There are still large pockets of the election still to be counted. We're still going to see a lot. I saw a comment from Neil Makija, who is a county commissioner, an Indian American county commissioner in Montgomery County in Pennsylvania, saying there are a lot of votes from Democratic strongholds still to come. So that's the hope that Democrats can have. but at this moment, it is not looking positive for Americans who are supporting Kamala Harris. We want to hear from you folks. We can put your questions on the air right now. Tell us where you're watching from. Ask your questions. We want to hear from you. We want to know what you're thinking. I saw that Steve is talking to Aparna saying same on stress and same on Philadelphia. So the world is watching this election. It matters who is president of the United States. It also matters because you're going to see a lot of this president, whether it's Kamala Harris or Donald Trump. You're going to see a lot of them on TV, in the news, on your social media feeds for the next 4 years. And that's why this matters. Most Americans don't know that America plays this outsized role. They think they're number one, but the way in which Americans have played historically, interfering around the world long before we can say anything about Iraq or Afghanistan or any other place where Americans have fought and died in the last few years. Vietnam, for example, long before that, Americans have intervened in the world and therefore have become, especially when you think of the CIA and other US government entities, having this big thumb on the scale on the world. And that's some of what we are seeing. The interest, who is going to be president of the United States, really matters. There was an interesting chart, Mary, looking at if people could vote in Europe, who would they vote for? And all the Western democratic countries overwhelmingly would vote for Kamala Harris, along with The Economist. But you saw in Eastern European countries, in Russia, in the countries with the strongmen, they said we would vote for Donald Trump. And as of this moment, it is now 11:52 Eastern time. We are going to stay on the air for another 15-20 minutes so that we can see what happens at midnight, whether we'll get an understanding of who is winning those swing states, those battleground states, and see if it's closer to for confirmation that Donald Trump is going to be president or not. But if we don't see that, we will give you as much information as we can. But you should all know that the Indian Express has wonderful 360-degree coverage. Go to indianexpress.com, check out the live blog, check out all the coverage on their social media channels. Such great stories, including going back in history and looking at Indian American representation in the US, starting with Dilip Singh Sound in the 1950s, was an elected congressman. So from that journey, from that point to where there's this sitting vice president of the United States of Indian American origin who had a chance and still has a chance to be president of the US, a Black woman, South Asian woman. It's a fascinating story. Indian Americans have become a larger and larger part of the American electorate. We're also seeing Indian Americans who are leading major American companies such as Google and IBM and Adobe, of course, Microsoft. And we're seeing South Asians who are in so many areas of the United States. And we are also seeing them in politics. We have multiple congressmen and women who are representing their districts who are in Indian American. And that's part of the American journey as well. And here's that story, 1956, important story running in Indian Express. So everybody, please check out the coverage. And we are very grateful to everyone who's watching and to our sponsors, Stryker and Hexo.ai. Everyone, please go to Indian Express and keep an eye on the coverage. Even if we're not able to resolve the election tonight, you will get the results and see full coverage on Indian Express. Here's a question that's come from Ranjit, who says, what will be the major international policy change expected if Trump wins? So Mary, first to you.
Well, he and J.D. Vance have both talked about cutting aid to Ukraine. In fact, remember Trump in front of Zelensky, who was also making his case because he has to work with any American president, said, I think a deal should be made and I could really make this deal quickly. Well, any deal that you make with Putin would be to give up territory. And so, Zelensky was nodding there, but I do think you would see pulling back from that. It's a more isolationist posture by the Republican Party, which is interesting because they used to, you flip that, they used to be the party of the strong defense, being a leader in the world. And now they're saying not so much. And so I think that would be a huge change. Also, as you talked about getting out of the climate agreement and the Iran nuclear treaty, pulling away from some international agreements. And you would see friendliness toward the more authoritarian countries, like with Orban. And he's also praised North Korean head and Xi in China as being really strong, smart people. And then, of course, I think you would see he tried to get a lot more support from American Jews by saying he would be a friend to Israel. Now, there was some resentment of that because that pushes the trope that Israel is the dual loyalty. You're loyal to Israel and not the United States or both countries. But I think you will see a much, the last time he moved the embassy and all of those things. And Netanyahu is very much probably celebrating tonight because he will feel that he would have a freer hand. And like Trump, he's someone that faces criminal charges and other things if he is he doesn't want to come up for a vote, but he wants to feel, as long as he pushes this war, that he has the support of the Israeli people, as in support during wartime. And one other thing, we don't know, it's looking pro-Trump, but remember 4 years ago when Trump was leading, when everybody went to bed in Pennsylvania. And that's one of the things that he led and said it was voter fraud, because he said, wait, when we went to bed, I was leading. And then I woke up and all of a sudden they found these votes. Well, no, they just counted more votes. So we really don't know. But it does look like it's trending toward Trump. But we don't know.
Thank you, Ranjit, for your question. Here's a question about women voters. Have they ditched Kamala Harris? I don't think that's the right framing. We saw a record turnout and interest among women, but it is true that some women who know what's at stake will still vote for Donald Trump, and that's what we've seen. So, Mary, I'd love your thoughts on that particular question.
Well, I think she'll still get a majority of the female vote. We see that. I think it's a couple of things. One is that a lot of men showed up, and usually they're lower propensity voters, young men, but he did juice them, their turnout. And another thing is, even though Trump did not win the majority of women voters the last 2 times he ran, he did win the majority of white women. And so that's another thing. I saw a lot of posts on social media from women of color saying, white women, will you have our backs this time? So I'll be interested in seeing how she was doing. It looked like she was doing about 50-50 in the pre-election polls, but who knows? But in that sense, a lot of them I do feel that they had a certain privilege and it wouldn't affect them. But I thought that they've seen the effects of the overturning of Roe v. Wade, and that they're affected just as much as any woman, because hospitals and doctors are afraid to take that chance to give them care when they feel they might be prosecuted. So we'll have to see. I don't know if they ditched her, but I don't know that white women, now I'm sure Black women are going to, between 85 and 100%, I'm sure they'll be voting for her, but they're a minority of women in America. It'll be interesting to see when Randall was on talking about South Asians being more conservative, because she is a woman of South Asian descent. And
we'll see how that all plays out. One of the things that we want to ask you, that there is going to be scapegoating, as always happens. And we were told that, Black men weren't going to support as much as they should. We're going to see that Muslim Americans and Arab Americans didn't support, if in fact she ends up losing Michigan, which has a high proportion of people of that background. What do you say to people who are going to start that scapegoating almost immediately?
Well, like I said, the majority, even of Black men, maybe not as high as a percentage of Black women, but I'm sure over 80% will vote for Kamala Harris. So I think we sort of give a pass and say, oh, we assume white men are going to vote for this white man who insults every minority there is. And I'm not sure why there isn't some kind of a price to pay for that, or at least criticism of that, and just sort of assume that's going to happen. So I don't think the scapegoating will be there. And as I said earlier, you can't tell people how to vote if they feel a certain way about the Biden administration's conduct in the Middle East, in the Israel-Gaza war. Although I think if she loses Michigan, people won't then, the Democratic Party won't go further left, or I think they'll actually go further right, trying to catch, what makes Trump's voters vote for him. Remember, after he won, people going to every little diner in Iowa. Why do you like, what is this mysterious Trump voter? And I always find that interesting, because they never go into urban areas and ask Black voters, what are your issues? And maybe they do, but not to the extent. It was like they were going on some kind of hunting trip. Let's go to find the cliche of the Trump voter in the diner in the Midwest. And some of that was race, I think, and the fear of a changing America, and looking at people of color ascending in that way. The fact that she is accomplished is actually a positive for some people who voted for her, but others, it may be a negative. And we saw that even with Barack Obama. Remember, he won 2 elections, he was popular, but he never won a majority of the white vote, ever. I think the last Democratic president, it's been quite a while, maybe Carter perhaps, but
Bill Clinton did well among white men.
Yes,
also.
yes,
so,
yeah.
Definitely Bill Clinton was in there.
But he didn't, he didn't, I'm not sure he won a majority of white voters. I have to look that up.
Yeah. But Ranjit Nair says, thanks for that explanation. And that's what we're doing on the show, folks. We're having this conversation. We're bringing your comments in. You're watching the show U.S. Election 2024 on the Indian Express, brought to you by Stryker and Hexo.ai. We're very grateful to our sponsors. Very grateful to everyone watching. Tag a friend right now on Facebook, on LinkedIn, on YouTube. They can watch this even though we're getting all this news. This is a conversation where you will learn and understand this complex country and its complicated electoral process, which has this immense impact on the world. Pallavi, who's watching on LinkedIn, says Trump and Zelensky both were media personalities, as we know, both made their name on television and movies and things like that. But the difference that matters are stark between the two of them. Why are people have difficulty computing this? We had several questions like this, Mary. It's really about Donald Trump's personality. What is it that people are willing to overlook? Things that one of the things that he said would have cost him the election in any other circumstance. But he won in 2016. He narrowly lost in 2020, and then is looking like he will win again. So how is that possible? And I want to point out, by the way, something that I think is, when we look at turnout and everything else, I want to see how many people voted this time. In 2020, we had 81 million people vote for Joe Biden. Donald Trump had 74 million voters, but 64 million stayed home. 64 million voters stayed home. What will that number be this year? Will also be interesting. Did this fire up people to go and vote, or did people stay home, vote for a third-party candidate? And how will this country understand what is at stake? There'll be people, so much joy for 50% of the country, and 50% of a little less than 50% will be really upset. And you can see here which states decide the election. It is all trending toward Donald Trump right now. And we don't know what exactly will happen, but you can see here where the trend is, Mary. We don't know about Nevada. Nevada can take a long time to come in. Some of these states will take some time to come in. He just needs 51 more votes. Harris needs 44, but you can see she doesn't have, at this moment, doesn't have it. Doesn't mean that this is exactly the way the election will turn out. Everyone watching, thank you very much. You can post your comments here. Here, Jan is talking about my newsletter where I said women's issues are everybody's issues. But we also know that women's issues, so-called women's issues, may not be even women's issues to all women. And that's one thing we've seen as well. So Mary,
Dan is a dear friend of mine, by the way, and we served
Yeah.
together on the Anne O'Hara McCormick Scholarship Fund for women who've been accepted to graduate journalism school. So we're trying to keep it on. You asked about Trump's appeal. Well, America does love celebrity, and that's how they got to know him in the beginning. And it's not even the real Trump in a sense. It's interesting that New Yorkers in New York City don't really vote for him because they know him as this person who he and his father in their real estate business were sued twice by the Nixon Justice Department, hardly the paragon of equality, for discriminating against Black people in the homes they own, in the apartments. They wouldn't rent to them. They were sued twice and they had to settle, although he never admits wrongdoing. He's the person who took out a full-page ad warning for the execution of the Central Park Five, who have been exonerated for accused of attacking and raping a white jogger in Central Park. They have actually sued him because he keeps saying that he doesn't accept that they've been exonerated. This is the same person that does business in a way that he has stiffed a lot of people he did business with in New York. But Tony Schwartz wrote that book, The Art of the Deal, that set him up as some big business person. And then he had a top-rated television show, The Apprentice, which the producer has said, one of the producers and people who handled them, I'm sorry I did this show because he's not a great business person. It was a TV show about a business person. And so people, when people would say, I think I want to elect him because he knows business, things like that. And New Yorkers would say, New Yorkers would say, oh, he used to call into tabloids under an assumed name to drop gossip about himself. This is who Donald Trump is. Yes, John Barron. So, but Americans have this image of them and they like celebrity. And as I said, I thought that the act was getting old, but apparently not. And he's very canny. He can get into that piece, all those ads about people coming into your suburban home, immigrants, and slitting your throat, and I'll protect you, worked on some people. And it's hard to admit in a sense, but as a person of color, who, when he talks about Haitian immigrants and eating people's pets and things like that, I know it's not just talking about Haitians. He talks about Black and brown people all the time in very disparaging ways. A lot of Americans buy that, or at least they are okay with it. And it's easy if you're not feeling good about the way the world is going, the way your pocketbook is going, the way your job is going. Having a scapegoat is so easy.
And what you're seeing here are the swing states in that beige color, the tan color that you see there. At the moment, he is leading in all of those. If he wins those, he will be the next president. And one of the things he has told us is that he will be better prepared to be president. He said he was surrounded, even though he tried to drain the swamp in a famous saying that he's going to improve the swamp, or improve Washington, D.C., which is famously built on an actual swamp, that he's going to improve it. In fact, the people who worked for him turned against him. Think about the fact that the only reason there was an opening for vice president on his ticket, Mary, is because his own supporters wanted to hang Mike Pence. Yes. I mean, these are the things, the chaos of the 4 years of Donald Trump, and basically the chaos of the last 8 years from 2015 onwards that we have seen, 9 years. We are going to continue to see that on the world stage. Yes. What I hope for the folks who are watching, who are supporters of Donald Trump, this is your moment to speak up and, of course, celebrate, but also know that half the country did not vote for Donald Trump. How are you going to treat those people as fellow Americans? And to Donald Trump and to the Republicans, how will they treat their fellow Americans? Are you voting? Are you running just as to be president of those people or the entire country? That's what we will be seeing in the days and weeks ahead. We have so much news. We have so many people watching. We're so grateful to everyone. This show is Election 2024 on the Indian Express, brought to you by Stryker and Hexo.ai. We're very grateful Mary, give us some thoughts as we start to wrap up here. We're going to keep an eye to see if any of the states are called. But at this moment, it is looking like those swing states, those battleground states, are trending towards Donald Trump, which means by the morning, Donald Trump will be president.
Well, I just keep going back to what he himself has said, that when asked about what his plans are for if he was elected, if he were to be elected, he said retribution against fellow Americans, against people who disagree with him, against people he thinks have wronged him. And he will have his new staffing, which won't be against all those people that are speaking against him now. He said they were terrible. So he'll have people who will say yes. And already Heritage Foundation folks have lists of how they're going to clean out expertise from the federal government and put in loyalists. That's something that we all should think about. And the fact that he said that, retribution, revenge, and a lot of people feel that that's okay. And so many conservatives, they get great joy on social media and elsewhere of owning the libs. And many people were saying, yes, if he wins, I can't wait to see the people on MSNBC cry, And there's something so interesting about that. What you just said, will they reach out, or will they say, we got you, we own you. You got to do what we say now. You got to read the books that we want to read. We want you to read all of these things. And there is so much at stake in this election. And it's great to say, well, maybe this time he'll turn and say, well, now that I'm going to try to heal the country, but that's not who he is. And I don't think somebody changes when they're 78 years old.
And JD Vance is not like that either. Folks, we want to show you what's happening on the Indian Express website. And JD Vance is not like that either. Folks, we want to show you what's happening on the Indian Express website. And JD Vance is not like that either. Folks, we want to show you what's happening on the Indian Express website. And JD Vance is not. Folks, we were just playing that audio. That's what you were seeing there. So Indian Express has got 360-degree coverage. We're very excited on the Indian Express website. Check out Election 2024. There we are, Mary, on the election website of the Indian Express, the homepage. Millions of people visit the Indian Express every day. And so we're glad to be there. And then you have the live blog where you can keep track of what's happening. So stay tuned on the Indian Express. We're going to be live with you for a few minutes longer just to see if there's any interesting results that come in, or we have confirmation either direction. I'm looking at Wisconsin at the moment, Pennsylvania at the moment. He has a commanding lead in those states. And that means that he is very likely to be president of the United States one more time. That's also very rare in American history for someone to be able to come back and be president. We're also seeing what this means in terms of Congress, and that's the Senate and the House of Representatives. And we know that the House of Representatives and the Senate are very likely to be in Republican hands. And that means that he will have full control of the government. And that means then that he has a chance to implement his agenda. If you want to be generous and positive, you could say, well, then here's his chance to fix the problem at the border, reduce prices for food, all the complaints that he's had. They will not have excuses why they didn't do the things that they promised the American people. But we know that America is a complicated place, as I've been saying many, many times, and we're going to watch as this unfolds, and the world will pay attention. And Donald Trump has that ability to get that attention, Mary, and we know that that'll be part of it. Your thoughts?
And we know that one of the first things he will do is drop all the federal charges against him, which he will be able to do with his Justice Department. His Supreme Court has given him almost complete immunity for any actions he takes as president if he becomes president. And we also know that a couple of people who are rooting for him were Sam Alito and Clarence Thomas. They're getting older, so they will be able to resign. I expect them to resign so he can put on the court and approve with the Republican Senate 40-year-old versions of them. Think about that. So this will affect our lives for a long, long time.
And remember, the elections, the Supreme Court in the U.S. has been for many, many decades 5-4 in depending on who has appointed the Supreme Court justices. But now it's already 6-3, and it's very likely to be 7-2. And that means even more solidification of the power. If we are analyzing what happened, if we go back, we can say that Hillary Clinton had, among many, many things, had to fight against misogyny. But when we look at what has happened with Kamala Harris, misogyny and racism, other things that have changed, getting young men to actually vote, young men, conservative young men, lots of liberal young men voted, of course, but getting conservative young men to participate. And credit for that has to go to Joe Rogan, as well as to Elon Musk. When Elon bought Twitter for $44 billion, a lot of people, including me, said, what a waste. This is a waste of money. He is burning $44 billion, but that's not what happened. He was, in fact, buying a presidency, buying a country for $44 billion. That's a steal when you have almost $1 trillion as Elon Musk has access to. And so we're seeing that combination. Those are the things that Kamala Harris has run into. And therefore, we're going to see the impact of this in the way Putin works in the world, where the way Netanyahu operates in the world, and what is going to happen in this country. There is an enemies list, and there are people that we know on that list. And this is something that in private has happened in the past, but now it's public, and we're going to be paying attention. This is the second time that a president has come back to be president of the United States. The first time that happened was with Grover Cleveland, who was the 22nd and the 24th president. Donald Trump will be the 45th and the 47th president.
If he wins.
That happens tonight and over the next few days. But it is not looking like that at all.
And I also think, besides the Supreme Court, I want to highlight something that the New York Times, the columnists are keeping alive blog, and one pointed out that the Democratic Party has an image problem because in Nebraska, a measure this is from Benjamin Applebaum, to guarantee paid sick leave is cruising to victory. In Missouri, voters are overwhelmingly supporting an increase in the state's minimum wage. These are issues Democratic politicians run on and Republican politicians oppose. But voters, at least in those states, seem to like the positions better than the politicians. So they vote for these folks, like in Texas, Ted Cruz, but the policies of raising the minimum wage and having sick leave, Democratic policies that Republicans vote against are passing. And just like Trump will, then he might have a chance to cement a wildly conservative Supreme Court for generations. And that might oppose all of these things. They've already gutted the EPA and other agencies that keep our water clean. So it's the Democratic brand seems to be toxic, but not the policies. And it's such a disconnect. It's really it's maybe they need to message better, but this is amazing to me. It's the cultural issues as well that seem to get them. But, evangelicals would love a Supreme Court that will pass all these onerous cultural restrictions. But why do you think that is? That the policies they like, just like the Affordable Care Act, now they love it. Yeah.
Donald Trump said repeatedly, I will repeal and replace Obamacare, which is a way to give health insurance to millions of Americans. I mean, these are the things that a lot of people watching may not realize, how precarious America's infrastructure and systems are, because most Americans are just one illness or one heart attack or one diagnosis away from bankruptcy in a country that's the only developed country in the world that does not provide real government assistance in terms of medical care. And these are things that other countries understand. The only country among its peers that has the death penalty, the only country that has more guns than people, the only country that has mass shootings that average a mass shooting a day. These are things that people don't understand about America. And you are seeing that at this moment, Americans, who about half the country, are thrilled, and you're going to see half the country devastated by this result because the way America has become polarized in a way that it wasn't before. But all of this is what we have to live with, and this is what the world has to live with. And I encourage everybody to pay attention to how the election ends up. Please watch the Indian Express website, see the shows that they're doing. There are lots of follow-up shows they're doing with great experts whose names you've been seeing on the screen all evening. You will learn and understand what is happening from Pratap Bhanu Mehta, from C. Rajamohan, from Tanvi Madan, from Bhaskar Chakravarti. All of these folks are going to be giving you insight on the Indian Express. This show is the Election 2024 on the Indian Express, brought to you by Stryker and Hexo.ai. We have been talking and getting comments and viewers from around the world. Mary, as we start to wrap up, I'm just keeping an eye to see if there's any chance that these states will be called or if there'll be any difference in the outcome. But it is definitely looking like Donald Trump is going to be president of the United States. The 45th is going to be 47 once again.
It is just, I'm going to be thinking about the country, a majority of people in the country who voted, seeing the policies, seeing the overturning of Roe v. Wade, hearing the insulting rhetoric and promises of retribution, the chaos, uncertainty, and saying, yes, I want 4 more years of that. That's it. And that's what I'm thinking. And I'm hoping, though, past this prologue, that there will be some effort at reconciliation. But we'll have to see. And I think the half of the country that voted against him, that voted for a change, they won't be silent. You know, they won't be silent. I remember, I don't know who to attribute it to, but a past civil rights worker, when things, they said one thing you never heard any of the said about anybody in the civil rights movement was, and then they gave up. So there will be resistance to some of these things. And it's fascinating because I think there'll be an exodus to some blue states. And it's already happened where you see women who get pregnant in red states, sometimes they can't find an OBGYN because so many doctors don't want to be practicing medicine with all these restrictions. It is really interesting. That, and the fact that also red states are the one that get most of the federal aid that Project 2025 wants to cut out, because it's not good for, your moral fiber that you're taking things like free lunches in the summertime for children who aren't getting free lunches at school anymore. You're getting you're going to get more things like water crises, infrastructure crises. I guess they are separating the party from the policy. And I'm going to be wrestling with that. I have to write a column on Deadline, by the way, so I'm not sure what it is. I'm going to try to pull something from all of this. But I think of things like Trump when he says things like the police shouldn't have immunity and they should have one day where they could be really violent and that will stop crime. I know the communities that they will be more prone to be violent with.
One of the things we've just seen today, by the way, the reporters from several major news organizations had all their credentials pulled and locked out of Trump headquarters tonight. So that's the kind of person and administration that we're going to see at the Indian Express. We're going to be keeping a close eye on the election results, as well as how the administration is formed, who is going to be participating, who are the different positions. We're going to see the Senate and the House also in Republican hands. And if every government official that has said, every candidate that has said that they are there to improve the lives of Americans. That's what people want to see, and we hope that they will be able to do that. We are starting to wind up here. I'm going to give Mary a chance to share some final thoughts. As she prepares, I'm just going to say to everybody, thank you so much for being with us for almost an hour and a half live on Indian Express as we talk about everything to do with the US election. I'm very proud of the way in which people ask questions and what we were able to show you. And this show is brought to you by Stryker and Hexo.ai. Please check out the live blog and live updates for the next few days. We have so much coverage on the Indian Express, including lots of analysis. What went wrong for the Harris campaign? What went right for the Donald Trump J.D. Vance campaign? Jonathan says this is a fascinating program. Thank you very much for that, Jonathan. So let's go now to Mary C. Curtis from the great state of North Carolina, where she has seen the split ticket happening. Basically, Donald Trump won the state, but Josh Stein won the governorship, running against a very flawed candidate, only not much as flawed as Donald Trump, but he was not able to come through. And therefore, Josh Stein will be the, I believe, the first Jewish governor of the state of North Carolina. Over to you, Mary.
Well, I love, Sree, how you always elevate all the people who don't vote. So I would just say, as someone who would crawl to vote, because I know my history, and had family that made sure I know it. If you are dissatisfied with the government and you did not vote, just think about that. I'll repeat something I said earlier on one of the earlier shows when people say, I'm just not interested in politics. And I say, well, politics is interested in you. It will control many things about you, your life, your children's lives, and it's part of legacy. And it's a responsibility, not saying who you should vote for. So all of those people who didn't, compared to other countries, our turnout is pretty low. So think about that. Your vote is your voice. And for some folks without a lot of money like Elon Musk to spread around, that's pretty much all you've got. So we don't have lobbyists for certain kinds of people in Washington making our case. So I would say, think about that.
That America has a history of a lot of Americans are voting against their own interests. There's a wonderful book by Thomas Frank about what's the matter with Kansas and how poor Americans who should find common cause with the Democrats vote on issues like guns and abortion and choose that way to do their politics, and that's what we're seeing in this country. So as we end now, sorry,
I just want to say briefly, but Sree, they're voting in their own interests because they get such comfort from certain things. So that's the trade-off.
That's beautifully put, and a great insight to Americans and to America. So as we go off the air just before a half hour past midnight in the eastern United States, we are seeing Donald Trump is on track to be president of the United States. The Senate is likely to be run by the Republicans, as they have flipped a couple of important seats. The House, we don't know, but we will know by the morning or so. But we are going to say goodbye. We're going to encourage all of you to go to the Indian Express website, indianexpress.com. Check out all the coverage there and stay tuned and follow Indian Express on all their platforms, on Facebook, on LinkedIn, on YouTube, on Twitter, and see their coverage. This show, U.S. Election 2024 on the Indian Express, brought to you by Stryker and Hexo.ai. We're very grateful. We're going to say goodbye to everyone watching, and just to say thank you to all of you for being with us. And thank you to our team here in the US that put this together at Digimentors, working with the wonderful team at Indian Express, even through their Diwali holiday, getting ready and working with us to produce this show. They make us look good, Mary, and we're grateful for that. And everyone, pay attention to what happens in the United States, because it happens to the world. Whatever happens here happens to the world. Good night from New York and North Carolina. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Kamala Harris. Donald Trump.
US Election 2024 brought to you by Striker, Hexo.ai,